This view should absolutely freak you out. As much as Team 1 has helped you to breathe and do press-ups, looking at this, standing in front of the microphone, looking at all those people staring back at you, should still make you nervous. And frankly, after 10 weeks of having great coaching, who still gets nervous when they have to present? Now, I know Team 1 asked this question, so I saw all of you put your hands up, so participate. Well, we have good news for you today. Because the reality is, after practicing and practicing and practicing even more, you will continue to freak out. And the reason that that's good news is because being nervous has its uses. It reminds you that you care. It helps you be authentic, and at the GSB, it's what we love, right? And I think comedian Mr. Lindy put it best, which is if I completely lost my nervousness, I would be completely frightened to death. So I think there's a role that nervousness can play when we speak. And today we're here to help you embrace freaking out. Now today we have 3 great guests with us. Each of them suffer from freaking out in a slightly different way. So we have with us Ms. Situational, we have with us Mr. Audience, and we have Dr. Goal. Now each one of them will go through a little bit about what makes them freak out, and then share a little bit about how they embrace it. Anyway, without further ado, I'd like to welcome our first guest, Z, also known as Ms. Situation.
Thanks. So I used to be very nervous when I'd have to come in front of people and speak. But then I figured out why I was nervous, and I was able to implement techniques to help me with it. So more specifically, I read the book by Matt Abrams, Speaking Out Without Freaking Out. And I discovered that my source of nervousness is called situation-based anxiety. What does that mean? So that means I'm nervous because of the situation or context I'm in when I'm speaking to people. So to give you guys an example to illustrate this, let's say James is outside speaking with a few of his friends about his startup. He's not nervous at all, and he knows the topic very well. But then if JD was to come and ask him to present in front of a few hundred people, James would be very nervous. And that's what we call situation-based anxiety. He's nervous because of the situation he's in. So as Patricio talked about earlier in the presentation, one of the reasons why you're nervous is that you see it no longer as a conversation, but as a performance. And you see it as having one right way of communicating your message. So as an actor or performer, there's a right and a wrong way. If you miss your cues, other actors on stage are going to be confused. Your light and sound people aren't going to know what's going on. But the good thing about speaking is that there isn't just one right way of doing it. There's definitely better and worse ways, but there isn't one right way. So by reframing the situation into a conversation as opposed to a performance, you're much more likely to remove some of that anxiety. So I know it's a little more difficult than just saying, imagine having a conversation with the 200 people sitting in front of you. So I'm going to give you guys a few techniques that you can use to do this. The first one is to practice conversationally. So instead of practicing in front of, standing up in front of, pretending to be in front of people, practice by like the dinner table or at coffee. I actually practiced early on the phone, right? So practice conversationally. Second, use questions. So these can be rhetorical questions, but by using questions, you're engaging the audience, and it becomes a dialogue. And a dialogue is a conversation. So you can start by using questions. Finally, the third thing I'd like to share with you guys is to speak conversationally. A lot of people, when they get in front of a group of people to present, they feel like they have to use formal language. But the reality is, when we're speaking every day, we don't use formal language. I would encourage you guys to use the word you. You is a very powerful word, and it connects you with your audience. And so, use it. It's a great tool that you guys have. So with that, I hope that you guys find these techniques useful and try them out if what you think you have is situational-based anxiety. And now James will introduce our next speaker.
Thank you so much, Z. Next up, we have Chris, also known as Mr. Audience.
So, I may look calm, relaxed, at ease in front of you right now, but it wasn't always like that. In fact, there was a time when a situation like this, clammy palms, high-pitched voice, forgetting my lines, the whole 9 yards. But that changed, and it wasn't by accident. It was actually kind of like an old joke that many of you may have heard already. How do you get to Carnegie Hall? Practice, practice, practice. And in particular, one of the practice techniques I used was visualization. And over the course of this research, I actually found that there's over 30 years of academic science backing up the idea that visualization is one of the best ways to deal with anxiety when dealing with an audience. So what is visualization anyways? A lot of you are probably already familiar with it. It's sort of seeing success happen in your mind. It's when your coach told you that you could make the big shot, land the perfect dive, or play that piano piece perfectly. And visualization translates well into performance, into giving talks, into presentations. So at this point, you might be thinking, like, that's great, but I don't want to become a Pee-wee football star. I'm talking to hundreds, maybe thousands of people. How can I use visualization to improve my performance? And before we answer that question, I think it's good to take a step back and think about what's actually driving the audience anxiety in the first place. So if you really consider it for a moment, you realize that what makes you, or at least what makes many people, ill at ease about the audience they're speaking to is that they don't know who they is. You know, your audience might not have the same level of knowledge about the subject matter. They might have power over you, or you might want to preserve or improve your relationship with them. And so that's where visualization comes into play. Well before you actually give a talk like this, what you want to do is come to the venue where you'll actually be speaking. Stand in the middle of the floor, soak it all in. Imagine your audience in front of you, and then see them in your mind's eye responding positively to your message. So even me right now, a couple days ago, I was in here kind of looking around, soaking it in, and now, the key is that it makes you feel desensitized to the experience, so that when you come in front of your audience and it's that big moment, it's not new to you, it's old hat. So I want to finish up, now that we've talked about sort of how to use visualization, we've talked about what it is, I want to take one quick minute and talk about what it's not. Visualization is not rehearsing your speech again and again in your head. That can actually be counterproductive because ironically, you're going to get performance anxiety if you do that. Your goal with visualization is to get yourself to a good mental comfort level with the people and venue you'll be speaking with. And that's how you'll improve audience anxiety.
Thanks, Chris. And then last but not least, we have James, also known as Dr. Goal.
Yes, people call me Dr. Go because first of all, I'm a doctor in engineering. Second, I always set high standards for everything I will do. For example, when I give presentation to the audience, it's got to be perfect. The process, the result, the message I'm delivering, they got to be perfect. Let me tell you a story. When I was working before coming to JSB, I used to frequently give presentations to group of people from different industry and companies, trying to convince them to buy my product from technical point of view. So before presentation, I used to think this presentation got to be perfect, otherwise I may lose my job, or then I will lose my apartment. Oh, maybe I will lose my wife, my family. Then I won't have food to eat. I will starve to death. Then you can see how this escalates from a failure of a presentation or possible failure of a presentation to a life-threatening event. That's to say, you very care about the result because you too care about the possible consequence. So that's what I experienced. Then how did I overcome this? I got two techniques to overcome this goal-oriented nervousness. The first technique is to accept the worst consequence and then do your best to build whatever you can upon it. Let me give you an example. Now I'm doing a presentation here in the United States at the GSB, thousands of miles away from my home country, China. And what's going to happen if I screw up? Then here I'm using James English name, not using my real name in China, and it's far away from there. No one knows me that much. Then I just say, if I screwed up, I just say, sayonara, and see you all guys in Japan. And then I walk away. Yes, if you're from Japan, use another country, yes. So when I accept this consequence, then I feel more relaxed when I give the presentation. The second technique you can use is to try to focus on the present when you are actually, before you are actually walking on the stage. I was actually doing push-ups when I was there. I only did 5. But I think it helped. It helped you to focus on the present because when you are doing push-ups, actually your brain is stuck in that moment. You cannot thinking of anything else with just counting the push-ups and hope you'll finish that very soon. So that's the second technique you can use. Try to do something to force yourself focus on the present. And I hope these 2 techniques will help you, especially the first one, the accept the worst consequence. Okay.
Thank you, Dr. Gull. So there we have it. 3 very different ways that people typically freak out. Now, some of our guests also shared a few methods in which they use to embrace their freaking out, but there's one thing that's important to note, and that is they picked ways that worked for them. Because most commonly, when people try and address this issue of freaking out when they speak, they try and pick the 3 or 4 things that other people suggest that they should do. And often that doesn't quite work, and then people freak out even more, and no matter how many times you take JD's class, you think you're doomed to be a bad speaker. So actually what we encourage you to do is to use Matt Abrams' book. Inside this book, there are 35 proven techniques that you can help embrace your freaking out. And we suggest that you understand what drives your anxiety and then pick the techniques that work for you. Now, before we let our guests go, I want to make sure that we help you along in your journey towards embracing your freaking out. So are there any questions that I can direct to our wonderful guests here today? Please.
Is it possible to be more than one? Because I've tried to think through these sometimes and I can't figure out which one I am. So is it possible to be more than one? And have you got any tips to find out which one you are?
Zee?
So I'd say, I definitely think it's like a very personal thing. And as James was mentioning, you kind of need to find the techniques that work for you. And I think it's the same thing in terms of cause of your anxiety. It's going to be not only based on when you're talking in general, but also on the situation and context that you're in, right? It might sometimes be the goal that's the most stressful, and sometimes it might be just because there's 1,000 people in the room, right? And so I think you just need to work on whatever techniques help you, and just it's a learning process, and know that at all times you're still going to be nervous, and to continue like working on finding new techniques to help you.
Any other questions? Please.
Looking for James, what do you do in a case where you are in China or Japan, and it is actually your own country and it's important for you? How do you then deal with that situation when it is something that's really high stakes?
Yes, that's a that's a tough situation. Actually, when I was in China, I was doing the presentation. I tried to convince me, even if I screwed up this presentation, I'm gonna be fine. The worst case is I lose this job, and then I will try to find another one. Okay. So I just try to convince myself, okay, this is not that important. You just do your best. So that's the technique I used. So the example when I was doing presentation here, that's a simplified version of the justification.
Final question.
Please.
Is there, in the research you did, the work you did on this presentation, is there anything that has been suggested that you just are very clear doesn't work, that you could eliminate from our lists of things we would try?
Chris?
Sure. One that immediately leaps to mind, and as I was speaking, I skipped over it. Abraham recommends sort of digging in to find out exactly who your audience will be. So in particular, he said, get on Facebook, Google them, LinkedIn. And I think that's a little bit of overkill. I think that To the extent that you can focus on the issues and anxieties driving you rather than trying to sort of get inside the heads of the audience before you start speaking, that'll serve you better.
Thank you for all your questions. Now remember, situation, audience, and goal. Pick from the menu for what works for you. Thank you.